Good afternoon, Art Therapy 105, Materials and Methods. I wanted to tape on Zoom this time so that everyone can read it and hear it and everything. This is for Thursday's class. This is an asynchronous lesson, and then you will have some art making at home to do, okay? Or wherever you are. And it's a found object work, and found objects are really used a lot, right? It's one other way of working, and it could be used on the continuum that we've been studying, because it basically means constructing things, right? So it's at the higher level of the cognitive stuff, of the spectrum that we had. But for art therapy, often we use, meditation, we use a concept of mindfulness, and different types of alternative therapies incorporated into what we do. And found object art and using art in nature is actually one of those things that a lot of art therapists work on, and with clients. And it's not always, it isn't always the case, that we all use the expressive therapies continuum. And in order to help you see that we don't all do that, I put together a little slideshow for you. It also will feature the work of artist Andrew Goldsworthy. Andrew Goldsworthy is an artist who specializes in doing things in nature. He does sculpture, and his sculpture not only is within the natural environment, but it involves natural elements from the area he's building the sculpture. So if you see something that's brightly colored, it's usually colored with some sort of mineral or something in the ground from around where he is, or the rocks are there, or the tree pieces. And he actually has a piece that he did out of an old barn that was torn down, and he used those pieces to build up another sculpture. So he's quite diverse in that sense. I'm going to have a few videos on here that you can watch for inspiration that are of his work. And when he works, he really gets in this flow state of mind, this meditative method of working, which we use a lot. Mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is this ability to, it's used in yoga and Buddhist philosophies, and it really involves allowing yourself to be kind of in that moment and let everything else kind of just be there and not bother you, right? So when you're doing something really exciting, you get in this Zen space, right? If you like to cook, or if you like to run and you don't even know what's going on around you, you can't even hear it, which is a little dangerous, but it happens. When I used to swim, it used to be like that. I never wanted to come up out of the water because it was so peaceful. But when you're doing art, sometimes you can get into that flow state also. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in this film. I'm going to do a screen share, of course, and I'm going to show you a PowerPoint, and hopefully it'll all work out. Let's see, here's the PowerPoint. Let's play this from the start. Okay, I'm going to make it, let's see, just make it my full screen. Let me get rid of this. Okay. All right, and I'm going to post this PowerPoint in Brightspace so that you can access the videos and that kind of thing, because obviously you can't access on the movie that I'm making right now, but you could look in there and access the little links. And I might even try to put the links in separately, actually, in the description, but I'm not sure. Let's see how this works, okay? So this lesson is using natural materials or found objects in therapy, art with intention. And art with intention and found objects, that's what this is all about. So if you're locked in your house because of COVID and you can't get out, or you're not safe to go outside because you're immune compromised or something, don't worry, you can still use things from inside your house to create, all right? So art therapy using nature, or nature-assisted therapy, is really a new part of our field. In the last maybe 5 to 10 years, it's taken off to the point where there's like eco art and nature-assisted art and art therapy in nature. There's all these different terms that are used to describe it. There's several books out. One of them is an ebook in the library if you're interested, and I have a reference of that in the back. We've had students do their research projects in graduate school about this, recently. April Fields did it, Rachel Fields. So here's the thing. When you use elements of nature in art therapy, you often incorporate a gestaltist kind of mindset or mindfulness approaches. Gestalt is a therapy method that really thinks about the here and now, right? Where you're sitting, what's around you, what the atmosphere is like, what the sounds are. So if you're sitting in a field with bees and birds and flowers, it sounds different than if you're sitting in your dorm room with everything around you, right? And gestaltists want to um, help people connect with what's happening right now instead of always worried about the past or always sort of having that interrupt their daily life. And so this gestaltist kind of focus is what uh, nature assisted art therapy brings, right? It also incorporates aspects of mindfulness, which are also used in other types of therapies like cognitive therapy. It's used in dialectical behavioral therapy. It's used in a lot of different methods in the psychological spectrum. So what it means is it's ecological awareness to help balance your body, your mind, and your connection to spirit. Sound familiar, right? Springfield College, body, mind, and spirit. It's this whole idea of being able to um, feel your feet on the ground and your head in the sky and enjoy the world around you in a balanced manner, right? Without going one way or the other. When people come to therapy, sometimes they're feeling really out of whack, like things just aren't working right. They're not even sure sometimes what it is. Sometimes there's a specific thing that happened or an incident, or they know when they started feeling depressed. But then it's other people come in and they really don't know. They just feel really out of sync. So, nature can really help with that in some instances. It's not for everybody though. It's about what surrounds us makes us, right? This whole idea of gestalt is everything that's around you right in this spot. In fact, when you take licensure tests, they often have questions about the gestalt because the gestalt involves this thing called the chair, where it's sort of the empty chair in the room and what's around it. It's kind of an interesting philosophy. That's another slide. So, using materials as tools. So when you use materials as tools, you're using found objects in the natural world or found objects from around your house. And those things, just like this pen, can become a tool. And I'm not talking about drawing with the pen. The pen can be used to build with. It can be used to sort of create images with more than one pen. There's a lot of different things that can happen, right? So I have a couple of I have an example of that in here. But it's this idea of the things that are around you in the space that you're in. Using materials as inspiration, right? You could use these natural materials to paint with, to draw with, to recreate things, like create a landscape of the beach, for example, to use clay right from the earth to make something. Or if you are somewhere and you see like a reddish soil, to use that to draw on, to use the sticks as like a pen by like Thoreau used to do by whittling it off and dipping it in the ink. So, there are ways that the materials as tools can be used also in art therapy. Using materials as inspiration, using sand, natural materials for sand mandalas is really big in Buddhist philosophy. And I'm going to show you a little film of some monks creating a mandala for meditation, and it's not like what you would think of like coloring pages. It's very spiritual and it has a very specific purpose, and it's very culturally significant. If you ever want to see one, we had one here at the monks came from up the street. There's a Tibetan Buddhist monastery here and in Springfield, and they came and they did mandalas right in the union, the student union, which was the Flynn Union. It was really kind of cool. So there is a place that you can learn more about that if you want to here in Springfield. So, but why would we use it, right? Populations that are often cut off from nature or from an outside world often feel really disconnected from people, from the environment, from the world around them, right? A lot of that, some urban dwellers, not everybody. I lived in a city for a very long time and I was very connected to nature, but I'm talking about people who may live in sky rises, who maybe can't get out at all. Or I know some kids from, really urban areas that have never really seen apple trees, or they have not really seen a pine cone until they went on a field trip to see one because the trees they had were little in front of their house, on the sidewalk, or they went to a park, which maybe didn't have that kind of tree. So, it depends on where you are and what the elements are around you. Prisoners aren't allowed to have things in nature in there. We often, our therapists who work with prisoners, and there's a lot of them, they often take sticks and pine cones and like those little, they take leaves and pine needles and things, and they bring them in so that people can actually feel nature. The inmates love it. They love feeling like they have a little piece of the outside in. The thing with prisons is, the art therapist needs to be accountable for every single material that goes in, and none of those materials can stay. So if someone is using nature or pieces of nature as tools or as a manner of creating art with prisoners, those pieces have to leave. So then they lose their connection again. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, but a lot of the inmates actually really enjoy doing stuff like this because it gives them at least 10 minutes where they pretend that they're somewhere else, right? People who are isolated, who maybe have agoraphobia, afraid to go out in the world, medical hospitals. When I worked in a medical hospital, the kids I worked with and the families I worked with, they were terrified of germs, much like we are in our COVID environment. And they may have somebody in their family who's immunocompromised, or they may be immunocompromised, maybe touching things that were on the ground as dirty to them, or not being able to wash something, leaves and stuff. Who knows what was there, birds. But, for most of us, it's okay. But there are certain populations in a medical environment that you can't bring that in. You can't bring a whole truckload of soil onto an oncology unit, for example. You don't know what's in it. It's safe for us, but it may not be for them. And those really who are just feeling really disconnected from the world could really utilize a nature-assisted therapy using art in a really healing manner. So when we think about art and nature, this is a picture of a Hudson River artist back at the turn of the 18th to 20th century. There was a special group of artists who went out into the wilds of the Hudson River in New York, which at that time was really wild. And the artists were often inspired by nature, right? And artists who work in this manner, who do landscapes, they're inspired to be included in the nature. You think about Ansel Adams, the photographer, would sit on a cliff for hours and then wait for the right light. And nature was around him. It surrounded him. He wasn't watching TV while he was waiting for it. He was there, right? He was appreciating the world around him. I don't think they had TVs out there then. But oftentimes the artists want to want to do a replication of something. They want to document something, or they sometimes do it for activism. Right now, art for activism is very popular. One of the most famous art for activism people was actually Henry David Thoreau, who's from Massachusetts. And you could visit, he wrote Walden Pond and several other books, and you can actually visit Walden Pond and see his old homestead there. It's a very spiritual place. But, these days we have, because we're so aware of climate control and global warming and all horrible things happening, activism using natural materials is actually a big piece of the art world right now. Sometimes art in the art world, like the visual arts, is made for a purpose. It's done for the purpose of viewing in a museum, such as this painting, or it could also be like for a ritual. If somebody is making a mask to depict a natural element, like an animal or a storm cloud, or maybe they're using natural elements to help describe or to help be part of nature. Native American cultures often do this. They'll use feathers, they'll use natural clays and paints, ochre from the ground, and they'll create masks or headdresses or beautiful objects that are spiritual to them and help them provide a ritual, say in faith or religion, and they're very connected to the earth. This is interesting because this is artist Alexander Calder. He's one of my favorite sculptors. He does a lot of these huge metal sculptures. He also does mobiles that are enormous, that are the size of buildings. But he gets that inspiration from nature. He spends a lot, he's from the UK. He's dead now, but when he was alive, he spent a lot of time just sitting in abandoned buildings where nature had overgrown them. He would sit like under a tree and just witness the natural archway that happened. And that's what he wanted to create with his work. So this is an example of some of his archways. Lay down. Lay down. Come on. You've been quiet the whole day. Lay down. Lay down. I have to finish this. Down. Do you want to go out there? Because we can do it. Now lay down. Lay down. Look down. Stay. So here is using natural elements in art, and this is about the artist Andrew Goldsworthy, who, has really been replicated many times. If you ever go to the beach and you see those rocks stacked up, or if you're on a hike and all of a sudden you see a whole bunch of rocks stacked up around you, a lot of those ideas came from the art that he inspired, because he was one of the first people to really use this art, as a visual art. In art therapy, we could actually learn a lot from him, because he gets lost in the artwork. He gets in this flow state, right? There is a movie, it's his, called Rivers and Tides, and it's about a piece he created on the beach out of ice. And it's really pretty amazing. But this flow state that he gets into, when he starts to look at patterns in nature, when he starts to look at shapes in nature, and then uses the elements from around that space to create a piece of art, that's what he does. So this is a stone wall that he created, and instead of doing it like a typical stone wall, he did it with the rocks that were around an area, and he also created like a pattern with it. It was like a snaking pattern throughout the trees, and it actually goes right through the water to the other side. It's quite long. And when he does these pieces, he actually gets permission from the landowners and things to put this on here. And oftentimes it has a utilitarian purpose as well. This piece in particular kept a couple of fields apart, so like sheep and stuff can graze. So here he is working. He is from the UK. He lives in Scotland. Um, he talks in his movie Rivers and Tides that he became lost in this creation, right? As he learned about the limits of the environment and the materials, um, and the assemblages that he made. You know, this type of sculpture that he makes is called assemblage or assemblage. And that means he's not using glues, fixatives, welding anything. He's just using the nature and stacking it and putting it together and see how it can stay there. So we're going to be doing something like that. But you know, he uses like natural elements like leaves and sticks and stones and wood, and sometimes he uses mud, but he never ever takes anything, you know, that's made in a factory and puts it in here. So sometimes people get a little upset with him because they see some of his work where there's really bright colors, and they say, you must have brought in something, a material that wasn't great. And he does a lot of research to find out what natural materials are from the area, that are manufactured in the area naturally, like some paints. But then he may dig out some of those minerals and use those minerals or bright leaves or something to create the brightness in some of his sculptures. This is a stone sculpture. He has this thing about these little buildings he makes. So it's pretty cool. But I thought you might want to see what he looks like. This is another piece of his art where he used, this is the same light. There's not a spotlight in the middle, but he used different color rocks to create a graded pattern. Now, art therapy, actually, we do stuff like this a lot. This art in the circle like this called a mandala, right? The circle is called a mandala in art therapy because that is from this Tibetan kind of philosophy. And when we do it, in art therapy, we might be doing it for a different intention. Each stone might have a meaning for us when we put it down. But for Goldsworthy, he was looking at the overall visual effect, right? The connection to the earth and the flow of nature in this assemblage. Now, this piece actually has a big hole in it, and the hole leads to another area, and water flows through it eventually. But I think this is an unfinished version of it. You can see where he was in the dirt here. It's kind of interesting. So I'm gonna put this as a PowerPoint in Brightspace for you, but I put a couple of movies in here. I originally showed a 2-hour movie that's on Amazon called Rivers and Tides of Goldsworthy and his art. It really is about him talking. It has a lot of silence in it. It has a lot of, you know, new age kind of music because this is sort of a new agey kind of thing. But it also is a movie that stresses the focus and intentionality of creating art in nature or using using nature to create art. Okay. Now, when I was looking for a free version, I streamed it through Amazon, but I couldn't find a free version because the library doesn't have it. But I could find it in this product called Daily Motion, which is from Canada. So it has some French subtitles. So don't get confused by that. If you hear somebody speaking in French or you see some subtitles that are in French, that's why it happens. There's not usually a lot of speaking in French in it, but some of the words and the production information is. So that's part 1 and part 2. Now, when I went to go open this year, for this class, I did have to open it twice. It had a little bit of an issue. I'm not really sure why the load was slow, but it's through Daily Motion, and you can watch it if you want. It's divided up into 2 parts, so it's not as long. I also included here some YouTube videos about Goldsworthy and his art. Some of them are only 50 minutes long. And remember, he's using found objects. He just happens to be doing it in nature. If you're in your house and you can't get out in the world, there might be some things in your house that you could create sculpture with, right? That you could create this assemblage or this found object art. And it doesn't always have to be in a mandala circle. It could actually be standing up. It could be like building something. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. So anyway, check out some of these things. And there's a website here that's about him. It's the Mitchell Gallery. And it has a lot of images of his stuff and a few other pieces. So, you know, this assignment was originally about creating a mandala, but you don't need to create a mandala. If you have another way to create some work that's natural or that is made up of found objects, that's fine, as long as you find this creative flow. And that's the goal, right? Just find this state of focus and creativity. Mandalas are used in Tibetan Buddhism, and like Goldsworthy, these mandalas are made of natural objects. They create mandalas out of sand colored with natural minerals and dyes. And for each time, each little piece of sand that they are putting down, and they actually grind the color right then and there. They have a certain pattern that they use because it's divided up into 4 elements, and different gods represent different things. I don't really understand the whole of Buddhism, but I do know that I'm grateful for the mandala because even just creating one is mesmerizing, and it, if accompanied by you know, chanting and prayer, which is what the Buddhist monks do, it actually could take you to another spiritual level. I've known people that it's happened to. So it creates a sense of flow, right? And relaxation. And you create patterns with it. And it's a circle that has a pattern in it. And so, you know, when you create a pattern, you sort of get lost in the pattern. And that's the idea. Mindful creation of patterns can help us put, you know, our problems on a shelf for a little while. So, you know, mandalas in particular are created with these patterns. Sometimes chanting is involved and it accompanies, you know, a creative process from the beginning to the end. There's also a lot of talking involved. It's not just silent prayer or anything. Because chanting is a prayer in Tibetan Buddhism, this helps them to find this ultimate focus. And the whole goal in Buddhism is to find enlightenment, right? And that's part of their journey. Mandalas are done traditionally and divided up into sections that correspond with chakras, and the colors have a lot of significance. The gold, for example, is very significant in the reds and the blues. So you will see those because I actually have a connection to a YouTube about a Tibetan sand mandala that was done in a college in a like a space, sort of like we had here a few years ago when we had a mandala. I'm actually I do have some more examples of them. I don't know if I actually have them in Brightspace right now, but I can see if I can find them. But you know, it might be interesting to look at or to look it up if you're interested in mandala. So assemblages for this assignment are about found objects. They're about patterns or structures. They could be, the assignment could be you using nature to create something, or you could be creating something of nature. I would prefer you do an assemblage, a sculpture, but if you don't have that ability to do that, you may have to use some creative methods. I did a time-lapse photography of my work in the sun. I made a little found object mandala, and I'll tell you, it was really fun to do, except it was very windy that day. It kept blowing away, which is all right. You know, I chose natural objects that I found right around where I was, and it could be done finding. And this was actually around the same time, so it was a lot warmer than with items found around the house. As long as it's creative and it has intention and a color pattern, you can do it. And like I said, it does not have to be a circle. It can actually be a square. It could be a little like standing sculpture or something like that if you're really inspired by Goldsworthy. So let me just show you this little mandala. Okay, so you can see that it kind of blew away in the end, and that that's really kind of it, you know, finding these found objects and assembling them into a pattern or a sculptural shape or something that really speaks to you. That's why I have all these videos on here, these short clips for inspiration. Oops, we're going again. There we go. So I wanted to show you some examples of student art. Now, we went to East Campus to do this a couple of years ago. Last year, we weren't able to because the exact time that we were supposed to go to East Campus last year, we actually went into COVID lockdown because it was about a year ago, right? March 13th, I think it was, and the class was the following week. So we had to really scramble. So that's why I turned this into also found objects, because not everyone could get outside and everyone was afraid. They didn't know what was happening. It was also new. So, I just wanted to show you some examples of students from East Campus because they did a great job. This is a mandala created with just pine needles and pine cones. Now, across campus, the landscapers are really great about picking things up, but there's still some sticks, some rocks, some twigs you can find. There might even be some pine needles over by the library. I don't know. There's a lot of different things you can find on campus. If you go down by the water, you might be able to find a few things. I think that was a cherry tomato in the middle. So this is another one. You can see that there are actually little pieces of pine cone over here, right around there, and this rock is in the middle, and then this sticks. Now this is an example of creating patterns without having to do the circle. It's the mandala. So this was a really nice piece. This took the student quite a while because they really had a focus and an intention in mind. It's not something you whip out in 20 seconds. Here's another one that was a mandala. It was a big pine cone near there. If you could get over to East Campus, I know that they have had regular shuttles over there to get students out in nature and stuff. You may want to see if you could get over there or go over there on a ride or something and collect some things from nature if you can, if you're on campus and you're able to. If you're not able to because you're in isolation, we can work with found objects, all right? Here's another one. This was using the bark of a tree, some acorn pieces and rocks and sticks to just lean up against the tree. Kind of, it looked a little bit like a little house. And this is a very simple one, right? With just a whole bunch of stuff brushed together, and having those 3 rocks was important, and that dandelion in the middle. And this one was a butterfly, and it incorporated shoes. So found objects are good, right? This was right on the beach there. And so this is an example. Last semester, I had a student, because I told you we were in lockdown, and he couldn't get outside. He said, I've been working in my dad's business, and there's a lot of bottles around. So what he did was he actually created a couple of different sculptures, found object sculptures, and patterns using the bottles, having them go out to create a mandala and then stacking them in different ways. So this is done with office supplies and a few shells. There's pattern. There's 3 different sets of scissors. There's some highlighters. These are the shells, and then these are the watercolor crayons. And this is all office supplies from just around the house. So if you follow the directions to the assignment, you could create a found object sculpture. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a mandala, but some students find that more interesting or more doable. You could do something that's 3-dimensional and standing up if you would like. And some of you may not be able to get out. So don't be afraid to be creative. I've had students do it with, nail polish. I've had, the bottles. I've had students peel an orange and break the orange peel up into pieces and then the middle of the orange. So there's a lot of different ways you could do it, right? And then you can eat it after. But the big thing you're going to need to do is everybody's going to need to take a picture of what you do, because we're going to share them in class, all right? Combine what you learned watching Rivers and Tides or some of the other videos that you looked at for inspiration and the Mandela resources I gave you, right? Combine all the stuff in this PowerPoint and use that for inspiration. Want you to create a sculpture, and that's actually supposed to say or a mandala, not of a mandala. So you could use found objects around your house or in nature, and you could do either or. You could create a sculpture, you could do a mandala. I don't really care, as long as you're doing it with intention. And it doesn't have to be big. It can be really tiny. Some of them are very small. Do not take risks. Like if you are in quarantine, or you live with somebody who doesn't want you to go outside for whatever reason because we're in COVID, or you don't live in a safe area where you can just sit outside, or if you live in a skyrise and you really can't get to nature easily, that's okay. You could use things from around your area. I've had students use like cigarette butts and things from the house and all kinds. I don't recommend cigarette butts because they're gross, but it was a desperate time. So anyway, that is what we're doing. I'm going to put a few more words of encouragement on Brightspace, and then I'm going to post this. Okay? Bye.